Hello and welcome everyone to the world famous Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Andrew Medina. I am member number 1212, and I'm so glad to be your host for the evening. We've got a great show coming at you tonight. I'm joined by the one and only Amy Forsythe to talk about her adventures in combat journalism. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome, Amy. Welcome to Adventurers Club.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here. It's wonderful.
Is it your first time at the Adventurers Club?
My first time here, and I am in just awe of the space, the people, the mission that you have here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's really great you could join us tonight. So how, in your own words, would you describe your adventures?
Well, you know, they're sort of courtesy of Uncle Sam. I started my career, born and raised in Northern California, near San Francisco, but kind of a small town, and I just knew living in a small town wasn't for me for the rest of my life. So I did the ultimate adventure-seeking thing to do and joined the Marines. I joined the Marine Corps and set off for a wild adventure. I really didn't even know what to expect, but I knew that my grandfather had served in the Marines during World War II and met my grandmother, who was an Army nurse, and they met on the island of Saipan and Guam during the Pacific, and I'd always spent time with them, and I heard about their stories in the service, and that's really what inspired me to join.
That's amazing. And what about the rest of your family? Your parents served, your brothers, sisters?
No, really just me. And so I took that very seriously, sure. And I spent a lot of time with them as a kid, but I was always just so inspired by their stories of patriotism and camaraderie, and they had great kinship with the other fellow service members that they had served with, and during that era too. My grandmother serving in uniform as a nurse in Saipan and Guam, and when I joined, though, they were a little bit nervous for me. Are you sure you want to do this? And so I didn't know what to expect, you know, but I just knew that it was a calling for me to be in the Marine Corps. Okay. And, you know, there's movies out there that it can inspire people, and it really was a movie called Full Metal Jacket
oh, sure.
that inspired me to serve. I said, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to take pictures. I want to tell the story, share the courage of what it takes to serve in uniform. And
Absolutely.
So that was in the mid-'80s. Of course, Top Gun was around, and that inspired me too. So I really didn't know what to expect, but in those early days that, you know, women wasn't really a popular thing to do, and so by me joining the Marine Corps, my friends thought I was crazy. But I was so bent on doing it, I just had to do it, and then let the wind take me wherever it was going to take me.
Absolutely. Now, you said in an interview with Shoutout Social that risking is always better than regretting. So how do you feel you've lived that axiom in your life?
Well, risking something, anything, is always better than regretting and saying, I wished I would have done that, or I should have done that, or I could have, or I would have if. And I hear too many people let their life go by and not take a chance, take the shot, take a risk, go do something, make an impact. And so I've just always tried to live by that. That you have to take risk in life in order to feel the rewards of living a life well lived. And the audience here and the members know what that feeling is. And once you get that feeling, you realize, yeah, okay, I want to push it to the next. What's the next thing? I want to do something bigger, bolder, better. And so by joining the Marines, I knew I was in for an adventure of some kind. I had literally no idea how I would just catch this epic wave of assignments and missions and meeting people, and the demand for what I was doing, what my skill set was, that would take me to the limits of my own capacity and really push me beyond my own limits.
Absolutely. Do you have a memory as a child maybe of like the very first time you put that axiom into practice? The very first time you said, I'm going to do this so I don't regret not doing it later?
Well, you know, I didn't really understand the power of risking when I was younger. But I do remember that my father inspired the patriotism that I would need in order to carry me through. So we would go to the Memorial Day parades, or we would go and wave on the 4th of July. And really, he planted that seed in me about patriotism, so it was more of a calling for me. It's not because I didn't join the Marines because I didn't have other options, or I wasn't looking for, a job. I truly felt like I wanted to be a service. And so that was the greatest gift, really, that he gave me. But there were no guarantees of anything in life. And so joining the Marines was just about the boldest thing a girl like me, I went to an all-girls Catholic school, could have done.
I know.
And so the nuns were like, what are you doing? My friends were just thought I was crazy. So I had to prove to them that, I can do anything, and this is something that was important at the time for me to do.
As someone who went to a Catholic boys' school up here, I can relate to that. How did you decide to pursue combat journalism in the Marines? We got the Marines part. I understand that. How was the combat journalism part?
Yeah, so there were very few jobs open to women at the time, and I want to say late 80s, early 90s, that women were filling admin roles or medical roles. But one of the jobs that was open was being a combat correspondent, where you have to write. I had to take a typing test at the time, an English diagnostic test, and they said, this is something that you are allowed to do. And so I said, that's perfect, because I was on the yearbook staff, and I always was curious about people. I loved talking to people, learning about people. So if I wanted to be of service, wear a uniform, I could also tell stories about our service members and our Marines and the legacy, and try to make a difference and tell those stories. And so that job just happened to be open, and so I lucked out really with that job.
Sure. So I want to look at the piece of media on screen right now. This is you anchoring,
That's right.
Obviously. And so what do you remember what this story was about? And do you remember, at what point in your career was this?
Well, this was early 2000s, 2003, 2004, and this was reporting for the Pentagon channel at the time. And so I would go to Washington, D.C. from time to time and fill in as an anchor and do field reporting for them. So I had a unique opportunity to go work in the field and then also come back to Washington, D.C. and then do some in-studio reporting.
Sure. So the Pentagon channel, I actually didn't know that existed. So what is that a competitive position? Like where does one watch the Pentagon channel?
Well, actually, I think that it's no longer on the air.
Gotcha,
but in the early days when they first came out with this, right after 9/11, they wanted a place where people can file their stories. Some people in the audience and you're listening could be familiar, if you've ever served overseas, the American Forces Network called AFN, and it's the English-speaking radio television networks that you see in Germany or Japan or overseas. And so I had also worked for AFN on my first duty station while I was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And so I just had part of that as being my network. And so from time to time, they'd invite me to come up and report.
Gotcha. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, but Guantanamo Bay, I want to jump back a little bit because, this is early 2000s, but I want to start go back to Guantanamo because that was one of your first assignments, right?
That's right. So my first assignment after going through my initial training, I got assigned to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to the Marine barracks there, a very legendary place for service for the Marines, guarding the kind of a DMZ, what we call a neutral zone. It was a minefield, basically, where the Cubans couldn't come to the base, and then the people on the base couldn't go over to Cuba. It was sectioned off. And the movie, you may recall, A Few Good Men had just come out. So I got my orders at school, and I said, I'm going where? To Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And so this is what I had in my mind. I thought, great, they're just going to love me there, right? So I get there, and I can, tell you now, after looking back, that it was difficult as being a woman there. There was only a couple women there at the time, and it was all infantry, Marines, and then the Navy mission. But I was reporting for the broadcasting station there. And at that time, some of you guys, audience members, may recall 1994 when the Cuban exodus and the Cubans and the Haitians tried to come to America. And so there were thousands of people at sea on life rafts getting picked up at sea and being brought to the base. So instantly it went from a sleepy little Navy training base to now it was a full-blown joint task force with tens of thousands of migrants, refugees on the base. And so very quickly I had to get very fast and quick with my stories and reporting and interview techniques. And so that was my first real-world experience with getting to go into the migrant camps and take photos and really document history of what was happening. And really one of the only journalists, military journalists there on the ground telling that story. And this was before the internet and before social media. But being able to be on the ground at the tip of the spear really at that moment was just a really great learning training ground for me.
Sure. I mean, so you talk about the sudden influx you had of refugees and migrants, and you had to do all this learning on the fly. What from your past, like what from your experience, like helped you get through that? What did you draw on to, rise to those challenges?
Well, little did I know later in life I'd end up getting deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other places, but that initial contact with a real-world event where people were, it was life or limb for these migrants, it brought home the reality of how lucky we are in the States to have the things that we have, where they're begging for food, water, shoes. They left everything. They gave up everything to try to come to America. And if nothing else, if they had just a pair of shorts on, no shoes, they had maybe their diploma or a graduation certificate to prove that they were of a professional person, especially the Cubans. And so I learned about different cultures and how desperate they were to come to America. So as someone who grew up in the land of plenty, I didn't know just how desperate people were to come to America.
Yeah, that's interesting. What proportion were high school, university educated?
Well, many of the Cubans were educated. Meanwhile, the Haitians, on the other hand, were not. And there was a coup, Jean-Bertrand Aristide at the time. And so we had to separate them, two different cultures. And so the dynamics were different. The Cubans were seeking asylum from Cuba. Meanwhile, the Haitians had other political issues going on. But for us as service members, this is many of our first experiences with conducting a non-combatant evacuation operation. We got all the family members off the base because it was dangerous for them to be there, and then having to engage with these locals that were there, or migrants really, and then understanding the policy. And so we had lawmakers come down. We had senior military officials come to learn more about the situation. But myself as a reporter, I was just learning on the fly, trying to tell the best stories, trying to get out the information in a real world breaking news situation to try to help people better understand. Right.
And as I imagine it would turn out, that process, that training of getting a lot of civilians out of a active combat zone would prove very handy later on in Iraq and Afghanistan.
It would, and little did I know later on that the things that we do as a military and we come together with the different services would be replicated many times over, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I'd say, in many instances.
Well, I'd rather be lucky than good, So fast forward, 2001, 9/11 happens. How did the culture change before versus after?
So I had served 8 years on active duty, mainly at Camp Pendleton. Some folks know that down in San Diego. And I left active duty so I could pursue my bachelor's degree. And then immediately 9/11 happens. And here I was thinking I was going to graduate college. I was going to go work in TV as a reporter. I was going to be the next Barbara Walters.
Okay.
But then 9/11 happened, and everything changed for me because I got mobilized to active duty. I went to Afghanistan. And then the war in Iraq kicked off, and then I got mobilized to go to Iraq twice. And so things took a real turn for me after 9/11. But the calling to continue serving, because we were at war for so long, I just couldn't walk away from it, knowing that other troops were going to continue going back and back and back. And I just wanted to be a part of that. I was really... it was really important to me to see it out and continue serving.
Sure. I didn't realize you were out. Like, you were done.
I was.
You were ready to move on, but...
I was. Well, I stayed in the reserves. I felt like it could be a good fit for me, but that's what the reserves are for, is to get to be of service when the country needs you most. And so filling that void where we couldn't have done it without our reserve components. But I was a full-time college student. I was attending Cal State San Marcos, and I was ready to, was already working in TV as a reporter in the local channel in Oceanside, California, and I get the call and it says, "Are you sitting down? Okay, you're going to be mobilized to active duty." This was in 2002, so I knew, I kind of had a sense it was coming, and so I had to put everything on hold and put my house in storage and put my household goods in storage, and so it was a kind of disruptive, but at that time the feeling was so like, I want to do whatever I can do. I have to do my part. Sure.
So you're over in Afghanistan. Let's talk about like some of the people you knew, the connections you made, on the service side. So women were not allowed to be in combat until relatively recently, certainly not when you first went over, right?
That's right. So this was in 2002, 2003 was my first deployment to Afghanistan. So very early on in the operations there in Afghanistan. So I lived and worked in a house actually in Kabul, which was right down the street from the U.S. Embassy that we had stood up again. Right. And so it was very permissive, actually. We could walk and go to a restaurant in town in Kabul, and people would tell us stories about the 70s and the early 80s of what Kabul used to be like. So learned the area, met media members of the media, Afghan journalists who were trying to cover the story and work with them to try to help get them the story. Myself also reporting and taking pictures and talking about the reconstruction that we were doing. At that time, it was very early. The Taliban had been disbanded almost, and so we were just doing reconstruction on schools, hospital, university, just ways to do humanitarian efforts. I was working for a civil task force, so meeting with women's groups and going to schools and trying to show a presence and support them in any way we could. And this was before even the war in Iraq kicked off. So things were very under control, very mild, permissive. But then, a year later, 2 years later, things would change.
And when you first got there, just the culture was, up until that point at least, had been rather isolated from Western, exposure, right? So someone like you would stand out quite a lot there.
Very much isolated and unknown of what's out in the real world and the big world. And so oftentimes with my blonde hair and wearing a weapon, these Afghans, this is the first time they're seeing Western people in person. So they would just stare. They could not take their eyes off, just looking and looking. And so it was interesting for me knowing, okay, these people have never seen a woman with blonde hair or women in uniform. And so that was a learning for me. I think I learned more about myself and understanding the larger world. So just fascinating, but very welcoming. Afghan people were warm and friendly. We were never at war with the Afghan people. And so they just wanted to try to solve some of their own problems as well, and we were there to try to enable that. But I was always drawn to the kids and the women especially, and so what I learned is that no matter where you are in the world, that sometimes women have a tendency to gravitate towards other women of other cultures across the board. And so here I am in Iraq going on foot patrol, house to house with infantry. They're looking for bad guys, insurgency happening, looking for explosives and any activity. And I would tag along, take pictures of them, but then the women of the house would always want to, come in their kitchen, and they want to tell me stuff that they're doing. And it was a way to extract information and intelligence that later would prove to be useful to a military operation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions, we skip by, but I want to jump back to it a little bit. Perhaps this is more in Iraq, but just because women were not allowed to be frontline combatants did not mean you were out of danger. Is that right? So
the dynamics really changed. I saw things change in Iraq in 2006, 7, 8, 9. And here is a picture of me with two fellow female Marines. The center person, her name was Megan McClung, and then on the other side is Lynn Murillo. And these two women I deployed with in 2006 to Iraq, and at the height of combat operations in Anbar province, places like Fallujah, Ramadi, you may have heard of those names, very dangerous places. And our dear Megan, bright red hair, triathlete, Naval Academy graduate, she was killed in an IED blast along with two other soldiers. And this was in 2006, and that got people's attention. People were really struck by, okay, this is the reality of combat. It has changed now. It's no longer just the junior enlisted infantrymen that are at risk, because mortars were dropping in, rockets were coming in, gunfire was coming at people at all places, whether you're on the base or outside the base. We call it outside the wire, the perimeter of the compound. No one was safe regardless of wherever you were. And so Megan was escorting a TV crew, Oliver North, the Fox News crew, and a Newsweek crew from the Ramadi Government Center, and their vehicle was struck, and they were killed instantly. And so long before the combat exclusion law in 2013 that allowed women to serve in combat roles or in combat operations, women were being injured and killed long before that. But this got people's attention, and it kind of flipped the script on how people viewed women in combat. If someone like Megan, who's risking everything to go and do the mission, then that means something to people, because there was no front lines. And so it got people's respect and attention in a way that we hadn't seen before. And so the burden of service and knowing that people, regardless of your gender, are at risk wherever you go. Deploy. When you step foot in combat zone, you're all in. Everyone is all in, regardless of where you may be on the front lines, the back lines, the rear garrison areas on the compound, because of the danger of the rockets and the mortars coming in.
And I mean, how did her death affect you? I mean, obviously you're a professional. You'd seen, I'm sure you've known other people who have been KIA, but how did her death affect you when that happened?
Well, we, as a combat correspondent, I was covering all the combat operations, which meant also covering the memorial services. So as we'd cover, outside the wire, and then the things that were happening on inside the wire, and reliving that, even though we didn't know them or knew of them, but reliving that and having to be the ones to talk about them and memorialize them in some way. But I had served with Megan years before, too, so I knew her from many years previously. So coming home, the day of her death in the news, it was very tragic. We got the call at the office, the boss took the call, then within 5 minutes, the chaplain walks in to our office, And then I knew something was up, and then they made the announcement to just our small team. We had 8 or 9 people on our team, and it was a real blow. And so I don't think it hit me until we were coming home and we were one less person, of realizing that. And so her mom and her family just wanted to keep in touch with me. And so for those that come home, being available to the family members because they want to stay in touch because they're keeping their memory alive. So we try to keep Megan's memory alive the best we can and talk about her, and I love talking about her because it helps remind people that women are also, at risk, but also that people don't know that women have been killed in combat. And so usually you hear about the men, the infantry, the heroes, the war fighters, who get the honored, memorialized and things like that. But to inspire the next generation and just telling her story of how gung-ho she was. I thought if anyone was going to get hit or get hurt, it would have been me because I'm out most of the time. I was schlepping my camera kit and trying to keep up with these guys on foot patrol. Right. And, she was a triathlete, a super, runner and Naval Academy, really smart girl. And, just there was no rhyme or reason to it at that time. So it was hard. And so when we got home, back to Camp Pendleton, we etched a rock with her name on it, and we put it at the top of this ridge line that she used to love to run. It was out of the way, hidden, but with her name on it. It was we called it McClung Ridge, and anytime that we go back there, we can, think of her. Even though we weren't supposed to put the memorial up, we weren't allowed to do it. The base commanding general would not have appreciated that, but we did it in secret. And so it was actually the catalyst for me to try to document some of these other memorial sites that are on the sprawling base. But that one memorial of Megan is just our West Coast way of remembering her. But she is laying in rest at Arlington National Cemetery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think anyone here will tell anyone that where her memorial is or that there is one. What were some of the other stories like that stuck with you from your time in Iraq and Afghanistan, or other, from Cuba?
Well, so my Iraq deployment, so I went back in 2008 and back to Iraq after 2006, which is very emotional. The roller coaster of losing so many people emotionally just took a toll. Just being exhausted, learning. Most of these kids were 21, 22, 25, so just young kids who gave it everything. And so just trying to let the dust settle a little bit. But I went back in 2008, and I would not have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself, that the progress that had been made in just 1 year's time was amazing. Going from a combat-riddled towns of Fallujah, Ramadi, where we call it Swiss cheese, the buildings are bombed out, there's no one there, it's a ghost town, and then coming back and a lot of it had been restored and reconstructed. And so it kind of gave us meaning and purpose and feel like it wasn't all for waste, was all not in vain. And so that was sort of therapeutic to see that these places had been restored and that life was beginning to come back to normal. So getting that sort of pleasure out of seeing all that hard work and the suffering from so many actually come to fruition was important for me. Sure. And likewise in Afghanistan, going from here in 2003, I went back in 2013, and then back again in 2018. And so to see these progress updates, I wouldn't say progress. In some ways we were making progress, some ways we were slipping backwards. And so, but documenting it, sharing it on, now social media was available, not like it was in 2003, 2006, and a little bit in 2008, but now social media is more prevalent in 2015 and 18. Yeah, and I could share in real time with family and friends and media and people back home about what was really going on.
Yeah. And so how do you think that changed, being able to do that, being able for you and others to update family and the world, really, in real time? How do you think that affected perception or attitudes toward the war?
Well, I think, taking these photos and sharing them with back home and with the media, that it gives them a sense of what we were doing there, and it gave them a sense of, okay, there's a purpose, there's people, there's humans that need our help. And so that was always the driving force, is to try to humanize our mission there, and at great sacrifice, blood and treasure, sorely lost in our troops, but that other people could see that there's people on the other end that wanted to know that we were doing the right thing for the right reason. So helping them shape that narrative was important. For sure.
So when you're schlepping your gear along, your camera gear, along with these foot patrols going house to house, were you carrying a weapon?
Definitely carrying a weapon.
What were you carrying?
9mm sidearm, and then most of the time an M16.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Loaded with full kit ammo, body armor, helmet, most of the time, especially in Iraq.
So how did you deal with the tension of, wanting to be a reporter and cover, the ongoing conflicts in the moment, with being a soldier and having to, cover your six and protect your squad and, do that part?
Well, that's the dilemma of, do I shoot my weapon, do I shoot the camera and the pictures? So my main job was shooting the camera, documenting it, because if I don't take the pictures, then no one else will. But of course, a life or death situation, I would have certainly, protect my life and the life of people around me. But I always was double-fisted, right? One hand I had a weapon, one hand I had a camera. And so knowing those priorities of always had a camera in my hand. And I knew that if I could just master using a camera, learning how it works and being able to document everything, then that I would know that that's my mission.
It's kind of like using a firearm in a lot of ways. There are all these little adjustments you can make and all these different add-ons and, parts to it that, can be swapped out. So
that's right.
Similar,
yeah, and if you don't know how to use it, you have to. You don't want to come back with, black film or, stuff that, dead batteries or something that didn't work. And so here I am in Afghanistan at the border of Kazakhstan, and very few Americans have ever made it up there. So it's the very northern border.
Is this Friendship Bridge?
That's right. So right on the other side of there. So you may recall it was 1989 when the Russians finally accepted defeat and rolled out of Afghanistan, and they rolled over this bridge called the Friendship Bridge, and in their tanks, and they left Afghanistan. So it's up at the northern part of the border, and I was able to tag along on a mission there with a general, taking photos of the engagement that we had with the Afghan border police. And so being able to touch down and see places that very few Americans have been. And so those are some adventures that I reflect back and really, want to share with people, that if I can do it and pave a way, carve a way out to find these places, then other people, journalists, and the next generation coming up, people who decide to want to serve or work in journalism, to have that curiosity and that passion to cover the story.
Absolutely. For those of you watching at home, she actually has a real, sign and billboard of that picture. So don't want to say you missed out, but you can't see it. It's not in person. It's cooler in person.
I'll show you on that photo that I'm standing at the border, you can see pictures where they have throughout the country. In Afghanistan is a picture of Hamid Karzai on the right-hand side, and then on the left is the great Masood. And so Masood was, they call him the Lion of Panjshir, which is a province, but he was killed on September 10th, 2001 by a camera. So the journalists had pretended to want to interview him, and they set up an interview with him, and it was the camera that exploded on him, and he died. But he was one of the Northern Alliance's leading warfighters that we were, helping, and then he was killed, and that was a prelude to 9/11. So he's memorialized in so many ways across the country, and so with his image, people can take great pride in knowing that they had him as fighting for them, but he was the prelude, killed by operatives in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but his son is now taking over that lead role and trying to fight the Taliban in Afghanistan. So a little backstory.
For sure, we appreciate it. Now, do we actually have a video from this area? Is that one of the ones that we have?
I think we had just a compilation video.
Gotcha.
But I wish I had done some reporting, but my role really, at this point in my career, I had switched from the Marines to the Navy.
Okay.
So I switched over to become a Navy public affairs officer, and my job really was to help the media get interviews with the right people and get them out to the front lines. And so I escorted media. I was assigned to a Special Operations Command, and so working with Green Berets, Rangers, and getting the media out to the front, the very, very tip of the front line at the border of Pakistan. We brought out an ABC News crew to the very border, which was just an amazing experience to try to push for more transparency and get these reporters out to a very, very remote location whenever we could.
And so you did that while you were in the Navy. What prompted the change from Marines to Navy?
Well, so I was enlisted in the Marines, and then I had direct commission opportunity came up in the Navy.
Gotcha.
And so after serving 18 years in the Marine Corps, this opportunity came up, and I got selected. I had already graduated from my undergrad and my master's degree, and I still wanted to continue to serve, so I took a chance and switched over to the Navy. No regrets whatsoever, a little bit different culture, but great people, and I'm still continuing to serve in the Navy Reserves now, and I was even mobilized in 2018 and deployed to Afghanistan as recent as that. And there's so many more things to do in the Navy, places to go. They sent me to Romania and Poland and Sri Lanka and Malaysia on assignment to cover all of our operations in the Indo-Pacific area. The Navy just has such a wide area, and I was living on Guam, and so I was just flying all over the Indo-Pacific, helping facilitate media interviews as a Navy public affairs officer.
That's really cool, and I want to get to that. But first, I want to ask a question that I'm sure will offend no one in this crowd. What was the cultural difference between the Marines and Navy?
Well, as the Marine Corps falls under the Department of the Navy, and so Marines are always, sailing on ship and getting transportation through the Navy. So we're proud to be partners in that way under the sea services. So the difference in culture for me really was the Navy is big and has a lot of technology. The Marine Corps is much smaller, more camaraderie, brotherhood, sisterhood. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And so no matter what uniform I wear now, or for those retired out there or veterans, no one can ever take that title away from you as being a Marine. And in the Navy, there's so many skilled technological jobs that people do, radar techs, submariners, pilots. These people are amazing. And to go on ship and sail at sea for 6, 7, 8, 9 months at a time, it's just amazing. I call myself a dirt sailor because I will not go on ship, right? I don't want to go on ship, so I'll go to Afghanistan or anywhere else, but the work that our sailors are doing at sea right now is just amazing, and so it's something that Americans can be very proud about.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing then is that the Navy is great chauffeurs for the Marines.
Yes.
Is that I'm hearing agreement from the crowd. We're going to move on. I'll take no follow-up questions. All right, so I want to talk about Europe in more recently. So you were in Poland, Czechoslovakia. When was that?
Yeah, so I was on assignment in Poland and Romania in 2019. So the Navy has actually, a little known fact, I didn't even know until I got my orders, the Navy is manning a ballistic missile defense system, 2 sites, one in Romania, one in Poland.
Okay.
And it's the same system that's on an Aegis destroyer. So they've taken that technology, it's ballistic missile defense, and they put it onto land. So really the only ones who can operate this launch system are Navy sailors. So it's smack dab in the middle of Romania and smack dab in the middle of Poland.
So what makes this system sort of unique for the people who don't know?
Well, basically, it's the Aegis combat weapon system. It's basically shooting a bullet into the space to hit a bullet. So if there was an outside a ballistic missile coming into Europe from outside, Middle East or wherever, we would launch a missile to take out that missile in space. It's just amazing technology.
Yeah.
And so it's part of our commitment to the NATO agreement that says we will man and operate these ballistic missile defense systems. And so in such, they have Navy teams there, about a team of 100 on each site, sailors, and I was a public affairs officer to do some media engagement and tell people about it and really work with the local communities to build trust about our presence there, because you put 100 Americans in the middle of Poland, and Polish people were very gracious and warm, but they want to know more. They want to understand it. They want to be good partners and support it, because we're there to support and prevent any ballistic missile defenses getting through the shield, is what they call it. NATO calls it the shield, so it's protecting all of Europe.
Okay. So was that uptick in your activity over there connected in any way to the current ongoing conflict with Russia and Ukraine?
No, not really. This preceded it in 2019.
Right.
However, we have seen reports that Russia's President Putin had referenced the site in Poland on several occasions, because his fear was that this was an offensive site, which it really was just more of a defensive. So we don't have the normal capabilities to actually be offensive.
Sure.
But he has mentioned the site by name several times.
So how is journalism different is this?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we were doing in Romania especially was engaging with locals, and again, building trust and confidence in the work that we're doing. So one of my favorite things was to be able to go out into the local schools and engage with the kids there. So
cute.
It really, it helps the sailors also cope to be so far away from home, but if they get to participate in any local community engagements or cultural events, it was really a great way. And so helping coordinate those and making sure that we're doing our part in the community.
How are the cultures, obviously it seems sort of self-evident, but I'm interested to hear your take about how the cultures were different between somewhere like Romania and somewhere like Iraq or Afghanistan.
Well, definitely different. I would say Iraq and Afghanistan, their basic needs: water, food sources, medical care, education, whereas in Eastern Europe, it's so much further advanced. And in Poland, I didn't know what to expect, because it's really not one of the main destinations for people to go travel, Americans to go travel to Poland. If you're going to go on a European vacation, you don't think Poland or Romania, but they just really have some amazing places to go and visit along the Black Sea or the Baltic Sea. And so I was quite surprised at how modern it was, and really people have rebuilt Poland since World War II, and it's just you can find everything from, very remote resorts to very high-end luxury places to stay. And so it's just really a great experience for me. But being on assignment there, courtesy of Uncle Sam, and so really understanding that and how grateful I am.
And what about the children in both? Because you worked with children in both. How are they different? How are they similar in Romania versus Iraq?
Kids are resilient everywhere. And so the kids in Iraq were noticeably more, I wouldn't say desperate, but they wanted to get something. Give us a soccer ball, give us some candy, some food, things like that. So much more outwardly towards service members, whereas Romanian and Poland children were much more reserved. So those are some of the things that I noticed. But kids are kids no matter where you go. You know, it's fun to engage with them, and it really lifted the spirits of service members when they can go and play, just have some playtime and go engage at a high school, and knowing that, you know, we have so many more things in common than we do differences.
Absolutely. And what about journalism? How was journalism done differently in those places?
Well, luckily, I got to work with a lot of the local media. And with the Polish media, we invited them to the base to give them an educational tour. And I'd go out to the TV stations, and I would talk to them and learn from them, and they learned from me. But we also did coaching and mentoring sessions with the Iraqi media and the Afghan media to bring them up and talk about standards, and very eager and ambitious, and they wanted to learn about how we do journalism. But they have a very maturing media cohort in Afghanistan. When I was there, I'm afraid things have, you know, maybe not progressed as much, but journalism, partnering with journalists in local host nation countries was a great way to exchange ideas and become friends. And I still keep in touch with my Afghan media friends to this day, as they're in, you know, a dire situation. But some of my best memories are working with local media, and then, you know, also covering stories. But they still have deadlines. They still have a demand signal. They're still, you know, trying to get the story out, and they're using social media to do their work as well. So so similar in many ways.
And how was their, you know, career's livelihood affected with the withdrawal?
Well, I can definitely tell you in Afghanistan, the media there, especially the ones that cover the U.S. operations and the ones that speak English, are desperate. And they reach out to me all the time, help me. And I really am at a loss as how I can help them. But I give them hope. I say, hang in there. And try to facilitate any kind of like contact this person or contact that person. But I found them to be very honest, hardworking, credible, but now their lives are in danger because they know that either they worked with the U.S. forces, so the Taliban has got their eye on them.
What is the best piece of advice you've gotten as a journalist that helped you in your career?
Oh boy. Well, I definitely think the mission is a calling to tell the stories of people out there and bring it to a public. Being curious enough to tell the stories and care enough that to share a story about something. And the piece of advice that I got, I was working for a colonel at the time, his name was Brian Salas, and he said, above the equipment and the bullets and the ammunition and the modernization and the trucks and the tanks and all the things that we talk about in the military, the most important thing you can do is share the courage it takes to wear a uniform. So we're out here sharing the courage, and that's something that people can relate to. So, you know, Americans have all forgotten Afghanistan years ago. So how do we keep that story alive? How do we tell the story of our troops who are still here, still getting injured and killed? How do we make that a story that your average American can want to understand better? So understanding the courage it takes to wear a uniform, I say, you know, it takes someone with a heart the size of Texas to go and serve and risk everything, and not come home, or, you know, it takes balls of steel to get out there, step foot in a combat zone. So sharing the courage it takes is really the way that I can help people connect and understand just how hard it is for troops out there, or sailors at sea for 9 months at a time. You know, that takes some courage, and being on ship is dangerous. People get injured or killed frequently.
Do you, looking back over an incredible career, what achievement are you most proud of? Let's start there.
Well, I would say the achievement is just making it to this age, making it, not getting kicked out, not getting in trouble, or, because many times I wanted to quit. Every day, there's been days where I don't want to do this anymore, or, but then I remember it's not maybe the senior people that I work for or that I work, at commands. And I'll tell you, back in August, as you recall, August 2021, where we were watching what was happening in Afghanistan, that was heartbreaking. It was gut-wrenching to watch this play out, on TV in real time, knowing what people were going through over there. And so, but not letting my emotions get the best of me, and then continuing to serve, because there's still story to tell, there's still more to do, and if I can continue doing that, then that's what I want to do. But the achievement of just not giving up. When I really wanted to. And I could retire anytime. I'm eligible for retirement. But what keeps people going long after they've made the money and the, have the job title? Why would anyone keep doing it? And it's just because they feel a calling. And so many of the folks a part of this organization, there's always one more adventure. There's something more to see, something more to learn. And that's why I love, the people in your organization and this group, is because they're the pace setters that keep us wanting more and the desire to want more. And so that's what kind of drives my desire. But I don't know if it's any one achievement, but just not quitting. That I'm proud of, for not quitting when I really wanted to.
Well, Amy Forsythe, with that ringing endorsement of the Adventurers Club, I think I'd like to open, actually, no, wait, hold on. You brought a couple videos to show us tonight. Would you like to go through those?
We can, if you wanted to. There's a 2-minute video. This past recent year, I was inducted to the San Diego County Hall of Fame.
Congratulations.
The Women's Hall of Fame under the historian category. And so thank you. After having a 30-year body of work and realizing I've interviewed thousands of people, although I don't remember all of them, but they sure do. And when one Marine came up to me years ago and said, "You did a story on me," and it was in the base newspaper, and his mother had clipped the newspaper and put it on the refrigerator where it sat for 10 years. And he said, "My mom kept that article on the refrigerator for 10 years. And I said, it's the stories like that I love to hear, because it makes him the hometown hero, something his parents can be proud of. And so if I can just write a story, take a photo, and then that person feels so proud of their service, then I've done my job. And so, and in doing that, I have a compilation of stories of service and chronicling the heroes from Camp Pendleton after 20 years of sustained combat operations. And I'll share this. Camp Pendleton is right down the road in between San Diego and LA, that big stretch of land that you'll see some helicopters and ships at sea and artillery going off at any given time on the base, because it's a training base where we train Marines for any contingency. But knowing that 20 years of sustained operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the world, that the treasure lost there was just so surreal. After I had come back, I lived on Guam for 5 years, I came back and I said, there's so many stories of memorials now from those that were killed in overseas. And so I put together a compilation in a book called Heroes Live Here, and it's filled with stories of our service members and their tremendous service and sacrifice. And in the research of the book, I learned that more Marines were killed from Iraq and Afghanistan that were based at Camp Pendleton than any other one base or station in America. So that's a heavy burden on our community, and the Oceanside community where people live, and they've supported the Marines, not just during Iraq and Afghanistan, but then looking at it from the base was stood up in 1942, so last year was 80 years. So through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom for Afghanistan, that the combat warfighters that had served in the Pacific and then in the Middle East were mostly all from Camp Pendleton. So there's a lot of stories there, and that before the base was a military base, it was a rich California history with a working cattle ranch, and so we preserved a lot of that history on Camp Pendleton as well. So the two legacies can coexist on the base. And so for those that have drive by it or ever want to take a tour, you know, I always tell people to try to come on base and see some of these beautiful sites. And so in my book called Heroes Live Here, talks about those stories and the history of the base. And it's just a kind of a collection of photos and connection points with these people that were killed throughout the 20-year of Iraq and Afghanistan.
And you have copies of your book here tonight, right?
I do. And, you know, I've been so fortunate. People have been so supportive of this endeavor because being able to share that story and memorialize people, while it's sad that they served and died, but we have to just say their name and share just how grateful we are as a nation for their sacrifice, and for the next generation to know that we had some real heroes that served and lost their lives, and their families will go on. And if it's something I can do for the Gold Star families to share and showcase their story, I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that. Are there any other projects you have coming up?
Well, I'm open to all things. I don't have any one particular project, but I am assigned to a unit in Germany, my Navy Reserve unit, Special Operations Unit. And so as we all heard this past week, where the president authorized a mobilization of additional 3,000 reserve troops to go and serve, it's sort of a prelude of what might be to come, another mobilization for me to continue serving, to support any contingency operations in Europe. But for now, I'm enjoying reconnecting with family and friends and colleagues here in California. As I mentioned, I had lived on Guam for 5 years, and so Guam feels like the edge of the earth because you're so far out there in the middle of the Pacific, and it's 7.5 hours beyond Hawaii and about 4 hours south of Japan. And so I was traveling a lot and didn't spend a lot of time back here on the mainland, but just trying to take it easy and share this book and share the courage it takes to wear a uniform within the book, and talking to audiences and groups. We had veteran groups out there that want to hear from troops that are still serving or recent veterans.
How does service strike you now? You know, now that at this point in your life, how does the idea of going back and serving again, hit you? How does it sit with you?
I would not have changed my career path and my epic journey into being deployed and accepting the mission. But really, I'm on a mission now to share with the next generation and try to inspire that next generation to serve in some capacity, because I think our nation right now is at a crossroads where our young people are not sure about their service ability or desire. So we have to make sure we have young men and women who are want to serve, capable of serving, in order to maintain our strong defense. And so any chance I get to inspire the next generation. I have a cousin who actually, her youngest son joined the Marines, and he said, "Amy, I watched you all those years serving." And so I said, okay, well, you never know who's watching, and watching what you're doing and then following in your footsteps. So I was very proud that he watched my career and then ended up joining. So you never know where you can influence people, and that next passing along the inspiration to serve and put yourself at risk. But those are things that people can do now for the next generation who have a very challenging future, and we can facilitate a way that they can find a way to serve in any capacity.
Sure. Is there anything else that if we left here tonight and you did not speak about, you would feel remiss at having missed?
Well, I think your organization is an amazing group of people who are doers. And, you know, the saying from Ben Franklin, either do something worth writing about or live a life worth reading about, right? So living a life that's worth talking about and having, you know, that adventurous spirit is something, you're just not living until you put yourself out on the edge of the world and do something dangerous, fun, exciting, and seek out those challenges. I would say don't sit at home and wait for adventure to find you. You have to go and find it. And so being driven by a mission and a passion is something we all need in order to stay alive and be in the world. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you here and share this story of my journey. It might inspire the next generation, and just know that our military is dedicated as ever to preserving our way of life. Not just here, but around the world, and being those unofficial ambassadors to the world. When we're out on a mission, we're engaging with people and hopefully leaving a lasting impact wherever we go.
For sure. Well, thank you, Amy Forsythe. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Lance will come to you with a microphone. Are there any questions from anyone? I see two questions so far.
I mean, do you ever get to go back to Cuba as just a civilian to go experience the Cuban society and just what it's like to live there?
I have not. I would love to, but I think the State Department might have some restrictions on Americans, still some particular restrictions on Americans. But as soon as it opens up, I would love to go.
I've been there, and it's easy to get through there, and there's no problem. And I met a lot of other people, and it's a fantastic, interesting culture. So go to Cuba.
I will take you up on that for sure.
I think we had a question over here. Lance on the right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. As a war correspondent, you know, obviously paid for by Uncle Sam, did you ever feel tension about censorship of what you could report? Like if you wanted to report a story and they were like, that's not, we can't. Did you ever have an issue with that, or can you speak to that?
From time to time, we probably had some discussions about the topics or the angle or what we were covering. I've definitely pushed some limits about what we can cover and how fast we want to cover it, and how often or how long it would take to get a story reviewed and then published. But by all means, we were covering the good news stories. I think we could propose some good and bad, or despite, you know, challenges, this is what's happening, in order to try to make it readable, you know, like balance it out. But of course, we were there to talk about the work that we were doing, which was positive, and we saw things in a positive light. But we would always facilitate media interviews with other, you know, journalists, civilian journalists. And so our role really is to shine a light and showcase the good work that we were doing. But from time to time, there could have been stories about some things that weren't going so well, or things that we needed to bring out to the open first, be the first to admit that, hey, this is what was going on. Yeah, good question.
Every journalist is always looking for a scoop, and you talked about being in the right place at the right time on a number of occasions. So what was the biggest scoop you ever got? Can you tell us about, you know, how that transpired and then how you shared that story?
Well, you know, that was a great question, because we've always been in the eye of the storm, basically, and being the one with the scoop and with the story. I can't think of any one story that was a first on the scene, I'm going to report it. But a lot of times, we were there, we were the only ones there with a camera. So I can tell you in Iraq in 2006 especially, when the media stopped covering Iraq because it was too dangerous. We had some very senior top media get injured and killed in Iraq, and so they stopped sending media. So the footage that you see on TV now is footage that we would have taken while we were out, and then we give that to the media. And so there were many instances where we were the only ones with the camera, and then we would send it to the media, and they would air it as their own media, as their own file footage, B-roll, interviews that we were capturing for them, and then they would report on it. So it's very interesting to be in a position where you were the only one with the camera, and then it's hot footage, you get it up on a satellite and blast it out to the media for them to pick it up, is how we would do that. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Amy, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story and your service. I look forward to reading your book as well. So my question is, when you transfer from the Marine Corps, and I don't know what rank you were when you started, but then I saw later the Navy uniform, you were rank of lieutenant, and you had a chest full of ribbons and decorations too. When you transferred from the Marines to the Navy, did your rank also transfer, or you went to college in the meantime? So I think that's how you became an officer. And then all those ribbons, did any of those originate in the Marine Corps, and you get to wear those Marine Corps ribbons on your Navy uniform too? Or how does all that work?
That's a great question. So in the Marine Corps, I was enlisted, and so to the rank of staff sergeant. And then in the Navy, it was what they call a direct commission program. So then I became an ensign, and then I became a lieutenant junior grade, and then a lieutenant, and now a lieutenant commander. And so, which was a very hard transition, right? As a Marine staff sergeant, where I was in charge of things and people, and then I went to the Navy, where they were like, don't touch anything, just sit in the corner until someone talks to you. You're in charge of nothing right now, you know? So it's kind of a leadership challenge for me to kind of have to remember my place. In one rank, I was doing things this way, and then a new rank, where I was just a little baby officer, and now I'm just sitting, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. But yes, all the ribbons that I had earned in the Marine Corps, they allow you to wear in the Navy and on Navy uniform. So the rank changed, the pay grade changed, and then my uniform changed, but the ribbons and the awards carried over.
Real quick,
yeah.
Phoebe, can we go back to the picture of Amy with the Romanian child so we can see the chest full of ribbons? If you can. No worries if you can. In the meantime.
Amy, about your program, Hoorah.
Oh, thank you.
So another question about crossing the Gulf from enlisted to an officer. Did you find as a journalist that enlisted folk were no longer willing to talk to you now that you're wearing khaki in the Navy? Or on the other side, you only have railroad tracks. Can you interview an admiral? Can you interview a four-striper? Are they going to talk to you? Do you have the horsepower to ask the questions? Can you talk about how that might have impacted you?
Yeah, good question. So when enlisted members become an officer, usually by way of a commissioning program with, you have to have a 4-year degree, but they call that a Mustang officer. So you go from enlisted to officer. And when other enlisted find out that you are already enlisted, there's some camaraderie there, and they know I've already been in their shoes, and so there's a little bit more trust. They know that I've already been there, done that, and we're on the same page. And so, but as an officer now, with some years behind me, I was a little older, very much older. I think I was 40 when I was just starting my Navy career, right? So the senior officers, the flag officers, the admirals look at me like, you didn't just join, you know? So a little bit older, like, yes. But still, can interview them by all means, give advice, advise them on certain things, give guidance. And so usually very well received when they know that I've already served a whole career as an enlisted combat correspondent or in the Marines. So I feel very fortunate to that. But some other officers, there's kind of maybe look down their nose a little bit sometimes at that career path and your commissioning program. If they're Naval Academy, there's some rivalries there going on. But overall, really great career path for people who really want to earn their way through the ranks. Yeah, thanks.
So we got one more question, Lance?
Okay, one more.
One more question,
Great. Thank
then
you.
we'll wrap it up.
Thank you for your service. I went to a naval officer's graduation a couple years ago for a nephew in medical corps. And there I met one of the Mustang enlisted people, officers, who had come up through the ranks as enlisted, and was now graduating as some sort of beginning naval medical person. And the pride in that person was really amazing to talk to them. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a great career journey, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have redone it any differently. And so here we are today. We're talking 30 years in for me, and so I feel very proud to have not quit. And so I would say, don't quit on yourself. Keep going, and you'll get to where you want to go.
And
Second question.
Yeah.
What sleepy town in Northern California?
In Sonoma County, a place called Santa Rosa. Is where I'm from. Third generation Santa Rosa, and so it's home for me where my family lives now.
So in the field, what equipment are you using? Video and stills, or just video?
Great question. Both, actually. Video is my love, but photography as well. And so I call myself double-fisted. Back when it was just a video camera or just a still photography, now you can take both with the same camera, but always try to capture those still images plus video wherever I go. Definitely having a camera, but learning how to edit footage and understanding what storytelling, what angles are out there, and how to capture the best shots has always been my goal.
And with that, we'll say thank you, Amy, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And for you folks at home, if you've liked what you've seen tonight, please feel free to subscribe and like the video. Helps us out a ton. We do this every single week, so if you liked what you saw, maybe come in person next time. All right, that's it for us. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week. Good night.